Today's a great privilege as we get to interview Jim McPherson. Jim has been a long-standing member of the Red Deer community. We've crossed paths a number of times in ways and places, and particularly Jim was instrumental in helping me come back to Red Deer. Sometimes ways that's a rather natural evolution of a family where, in our case, 5 boys and 3 of them are back in Red Deer. But I have to thank Jim for that. And we also, lived close to each other at one time, or at least on the same street in Red Deer at one time, and we've been members of the Rotary Club for a very extended period of time.
Don't add them both up.
Yeah. So today is a privilege, and Jim has had a significant impact on the Red Deer community, both professionally as an insurance broker and leader, and as a politician. So and as a family member whose family have, in other ways, contributed significantly to the changes in Red Deer and some of the events in Red Deer. So I'm looking forward to hearing about some of those, and particularly hearing about those that I might have had an association with, and I guess that means in the Rotary Club. But anyway, Jim, perhaps we can begin, if we might, with your family. You might tell us a bit about your own family and how they came to Red Deer and how you end up staying in Red Deer.
Oh, well, thank you, Bob, and thank you for this unique opportunity. It's never done this before, probably never do it again, but it's really neat to do this, particularly with you, because our families have been so entwined in Red Deer over these many years that I guess we could go on forever on this, but I don't think we dare do that. Our family, my father was a manager of Canadian Bank of Commerce. He started his career in Calgary at the age of 18. He became a manager. His first posting was in Willingdon, Alberta. And from there he went to where my younger brother Hugh was born. I was born in Calgary. Before Dad was a manager, he was a clerk. Then we moved to Willingdon, and then our family moved to St. Paul, Alberta, and then we moved to Vermilion, Alberta, and then Father...
Vermilion or Fort Vermilion?
Vermilion, yeah, Vermilion, northeast of Edmonton. And then Father was transferred to Red Deer. We moved as a family in 1958 to Red Deer. At that time, Father was the manager of the Canadian Bank of Commerce. And shortly after that, the Canadian Bank of Commerce amalgamated with the Canadian Imperial Bank, and Father ended up being the manager of that amalgamated branch. So we moved to Red Deer in 1958. Dad, my mother and father became well ensconced in the community. My father was the first president of the Red Deer Club, the Red Deer Waskesiu Club of the Kiwanis, the Red Deer Kiwanis Waskesiu. Became their founder. He was a Rotarian first, and then he moved to the Kiwanis Club because they wanted an experienced man that could be their first president, and that was Tom. And
it's not unusual in Red Deer. I know Dad at one time was in 3 clubs at the same time. One, of course, was the Kinsman Club, which ejected you at age 40.
Yes.
And then it was just a party club, and so he went looking for another club and joined the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
And then he was in the one you probably never heard of, the Active Club.
No.
I think they were just active at having parties.
Yeah. Well, that was sort of the initial our beginnings in Red Deer. Is in 1958. Our family moved. At that time, our older brother Alec actually never moved to Red Deer. Alec, by the time we moved to Red Deer in '58, Alec was already in medical school at the University of Alberta. He was here in the summer, but he was actually a medical student. My sister Lynn, who was second in our family, she moved to Red Deer. She graduated from the Lindsay Thurber Comprehensive High School. She was the Queen of Hearts her final year, and you would know her, and a lot of other people your age would know her. She's done well. She was at our home she was here last week watching the Olympics with my wife Marlis. It was terrific to have her. So there was Lynn and there was Neil, and Neil graduated high school in Red Deer and went on to become a teacher in Edmonton and ultimately a principal. Hugh, my younger brother, we all graduated in Red Deer. Hugh became a principal, and I've got lots to say about Hugh in a little while, and then myself. So we were a family of 5, and Red Deer became our stomping grounds, as it were. So the other point I thought I might make about Mona, our mother, was Mona was very, very involved in the community, as was Dad. Mona was, I think, president of the Dr. Richard Parsons Auxiliary Clinic at the Red Deer Hospital. And so she was very, very involved in the community. So that was our family. We moved to Red Deer a long time ago, and we've all been very active in the community.
Your comments trigger a couple of points that I recall around our kitchen table as well. One was Father's perennial concern that it needed people like your father to come to Red Deer, but come to Red Deer and stay, because certainly after the war and in the 50s, Red Deer was known as branch plant country, and major companies, particularly the banks, the RCMP, the government, would turn over their staff every 2 to 4 years. Yeah. So if you had a good person come to Red Deer, that was just a good reason for them to be promoted and leave. And I know when Dad got involved in starting the United Way, he had an awful time because the first person was an excellent salesperson, marketing person, but he was the board chair, and they couldn't find a second person the year after because, of course, he left.
Yeah.
So Red Deer really had a problem with continuity, and in an unfortunate way, it was a subsidiary of Calgary and Edmonton, and what happened here was belated with less effect, and more particularly, the quality people left. The other comment I'd make is about the Imperial Bank and how our family were connected with the Imperial side of it through some family friends that go back to the Toronto days and when Mother was taking optometry, and she won as the top graduate in her class, she won the Hermont Award or prize. And Percy Hermont, who was the head of Imperial Optical at that time, presented her with $100, which allowed her to buy a graduation dress. But he was furious because he thought he would never make $1. And of course, Mother stayed in practice for so many years, and we had the luxury of meeting people like your own family. I didn't mean to diverge, but I so remember that branch plant problem that Red Deer had. It took many decades for that to change.
It sure did. It did. And that story relates specifically to my father, Tom, because I remember Tom telling me that he retired after 42 years with the bank, and he retired at the age of 60. And not many people did that back then. And the reason he retired was Dad was well thought of in the bank, and the bank went to Father, and Dad said he announced that he was going to retire with full pension at 60, and they tried to convince him otherwise, and they offered him the branch at Lake Louise. And of course, I was an avid skier at the time, and Dad did not accept that posting. And I said, Dad, are you kidding? That's got to be the biggest plum in the bank. And he says, no, Jamie, that move from there will be in head office, and I'm not going anywhere from Red Deer. We raised our family in Red Deer. We're staying in Red Deer.
Well, we certainly know through our Rotary experiences that that's happened to a number of really highly qualified
yeah.
people, particularly bankers.
Oh yeah, bankers and RCMP officers.
We've had a few, and of course a few have left. The other member of your family that I've crossed paths with, in addition to Hugh, that I'd like you to say a bit about.
I'd like to.
Is Alex, and I don't know him well, but I certainly know of him, and have watched his career evolve, develop, and over the years. So I think of it from the point of view of our next door neighbor, not Kerry Wood, but the one on the other side was a chap named McGregor Parsons. And he became the president of the Canadian Medical Association the year after the Duke of Edinburgh. And went on to make some major contributions, including the contributing or participating in the start of the Foothills Hospital in Calgary. But I know that Alex had a very illustrious, significant career in medicine. If you wanted to just share a few of the highlights.
Yeah, I think I could do that. Not so much his medical career, but Alec graduated from medicine at the age of 16. I really don't think that.
Really?
Yeah. He graduated from the University of Alberta with his medical degree at the age of 19 or something like that.
Yeah.
Then he went to Australia and did his PhD in oncology. So very fascinating career he's had. Alec was a cancer specialist, an oncologist. I've got that right, do I, Bob? An oncologist,
Yeah.
an immunologist.
He was a researcher.
Yeah. And but then and he became director of medicine of the Cross Cancer Institute. He was the president of the Alberta Medical Association and subsequently president of the Canadian Medical Association. So he paid his dues. He did yeoman's work in that area. He also became deputy minister of health in the 1980s. In fact, he was deputy minister of health when I was the MLA for Red Deer. And that got a little embarrassing at times, but he was the deputy minister of health under Marvin Moore. And he was the executive director appointed by, I'm sorry, I said Marvin Moore. First it was, forgive me. Oh, I love that guy. Marvin Moore was his second minister. I'll think of it in a minute. But he was appointed as the executive director of the Lou Heinemann Rainbow Commission on healthcare, and they did a 2-3 year major study on healthcare. I thought of that the other day because I had an appointment with my doctor, and it's not just him. This has been going on for a number of years, but he sat there on his computer and he pulled up everything that pertains to me medically on his computer. It's called the network or the net care. It's called net care. We can all do that ourselves now on the computer by going to My Digital Health. I remember in the 80s, that report, the Rainbow Report, I had to read that damned report because it was like that. Because Premier Lougheed had asked me if I would sort of be, he said, you can't do everything. He said, you got to pick your fights. You need to pick 2 or 3 areas, become conversant in those areas, and not try to become conversant in all issues. So, because I was trying to do that and I couldn't, I was frying up. But I read that report, and I remember very well that one of the main recommendations is they need to digitize healthcare, procedures, all things, and that's now true, of course, but back then it wasn't. So yeah, Alec and Ann have lived in Red Deer all these years. I'm sorry, in Edmonton all these years. He certainly has made a major contribution to the field of medicine and the field of if there's such a thing, the medical economics of medicine in Alberta.
The Rainbow Report was well received, particularly because it gave, albeit a somewhat near-term set of recommendations for how medicine could change and change more rapidly, and did accelerate the computerization of doctors' offices.
Yeah.
And that has had to be integrated now with the hospital and computerized information into creating a medical record. And I'm delighted to see how open and available that information now is. That's a precedent for the rest of the country. But your family is quite both significant and illustrious in its contributions in different ways to the country. Hugh interests me in particular because he stayed in Red Deer and as a teacher. And while we are talking about your family, perhaps you'd share some other family comments, if you would, particularly as they relate to Red Deer.
Well, Hugh, Alec made a major contribution. My sister Lynn has so many friends in Red Deer, but she's lived in Chilliwack for 40 years or so, but she still loves to be in Red Deer. She was with us last week. She's a retired nurse. Neil, we lost Neil to cancer around about 10 years ago. He had an illustrious career as an education principal. When he retired, he volunteered for the Zebra organization in Edmonton. The Zebra.
Got his stripes today.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was watching the Oilers game last night, and on their 50-50, the Zebra organization was the beneficiary of the funds of the 50-50 tickets for the Edmonton Oilers game last night. Neil was a volunteer for that, and what they do is they, amongst many things, one of the things that he was very involved with was assisting young people who were interfacing the legal system for any number of reasons, and to assist those young people through the legal system. And it's an arduous friend. He loved it. He loved working with kids. As a volunteer. Well, then they needed an executive director, so he put his name down and they hired him. And he told me at his interview, they knew him well, that he was hired. So he got in his car and he drove home to Peggy, and on his way home he said, "What the heck am I doing? I'm now going to become an administrator and I'm not going to be able to work with kids." He turned around and drove back and said, "I can't take this job." So yeah, Neil was Neil. Now Hugh. Well, Hugh is my younger brother. He's my soulmate. He's my best friend. Hugh's accomplishments are the most significant in our family. He has always had a devotion for working with kids. I thought I was fairly popular in Red Deer. Not even close. You go anywhere with my brother Hugh. He taught in Red Deer for 30 years. You can't go anywhere with Hugh without someone saying, "Hi, Mr. McPherson, it's wonderful to see you." He touched so many people.
Such a unique talent.
And he's just an unbelievable guy. His accomplishments are myriad. He is an honored member of the Alberta Sports Hall of Fame. He was the vice chairman right with Lynn Radford for the recently held 2019 Canada Games. I can't think of all the things that he's done. He's going to chair right this year a major golf tournament, the seniors Canadian-wide golf tournament at the Red Deer Golf and Country Club this upcoming summer. He can't say no. He keeps doing stuff all the time. Hugh is a remarkable guy. I love him dearly.
You have some of those fabulous characteristics too, Jim, in your thoughtfulness and some of the things that you've been able to do. But perhaps you'd start by telling us a bit about your career, how you got into insurance, and some of the events and experiences that have flowed from that.
And let me be relatively quick on that because that is really a boring subject. When I graduated, I graduated twice from high school in Red Deer. I graduated from St. Thomas Aquinas with my diploma and not my matriculation. And I'd like to say that there was a plan for that. There wasn't. I wasn't smart enough. So I did go to the Lindsay Thurber Comprehensive High School for 2 semesters. Remember, there were 3 semesters back in those days. But that allowed me to play football for the comp for the fall and basketball for the comp for the winter. And I did get my matriculation. Hugh, my brother, denies that. I can prove it. I did. But I chose not to go to university. I chose to go to technical school. I went to NAIT, and I took marketing administration and graduated, much to my younger brother's surprise. And I wanted to be in sales. I thought there was an opportunity to make good money in sales. So I interviewed with Dominion Securities, and I was right ready to hire on with them. And there was a fine gentleman who met me at NAIT. I was still a student. And there was a career day, and his name was Don Harvey. And he was the general manager of the New York Life Insurance Company. And he attracted me, and I thought he was the most interesting, charismatic man I'd ever met. So I signed on with New York Life in 1969. I started with the New York Life on June 2nd, 1969. Do you know that makes this my 52nd continuous year of being licensed in the province of Alberta today? I still have my license and I still work. Anyway, I loved it. I started with them. I wanted to go. My intention was to work for a year and then quit and go tour Europe. But you know what happened? In the first year of my career, I worked hard. I was in Edmonton, not Red Deer. I made the $1 Million Round Table. I was the youngest person ever to qualify for the $1 Million Round Table at the age of 21. And damn it, I had to stay in the business the rest of my career.
You've already proven that you could be successful and were successful, and the career choice was an excellent one for you.
Yeah, for me it was, yeah.
And somewhere along the line, you met Marlis.
Yes, I met Morris at an apartment that I lived at. Well, she happened to live, and that was the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me, was meeting Morris. And we had a wonderful, and do have a very, very wonderful relationship. We celebrated our 50th anniversary on July the 11th of this past summer. So we've got 2 wonderful children, Hamish and Lisa. Hamish is a developer and a finishing carpenter in Chilliwack, BC. And Lisa is married to Ronan, and they have Lachlan and Graham and our little princess Regan, and they live just southwest of town. We've been very blessed.
Their families are always highlights and come first in our lives. Somewhere along the line, line, Jim, you got involved in or interested in, or somebody got you interested in politics, and that became a significant event in your life when you joined the Conservative Party and then ran for an election here, and everybody knew Jim McPherson, so I suppose that the people running against you was a foregone conclusion that they shouldn't. But tell us a bit about your involvement in politics, your first speeches, and some of the changes that you had an influence on.
I will. I'd like to do that. But before I do, I thought in my mind when I knew some of the questions that you were going to ask me, Bob, and one of the questions that you were going to ask me that did, and you said, like, well, perhaps one of the few of the things that were your great accomplishments in your business career. And because I know you so well, and because I knew you were going to be asking me that question, I wanted to answer it this way. I don't say this for the convenience of the moment, but one of my great accomplishments as an advisor was I sold your mother an annuity when she was probably in her, I would probably say, early to mid 60s. And she was a very, very professional optometrist, a highly regarded optometrist in Red Deer. And I sold her an annuity. And it gave me a great deal of pride and I kept involved with Sadie over 30 years. And the insurance company that I placed that business with paid her every month. Annuities operate in such a way where the insurance company will pay every month. And if you die early, you're a loser. And if you die late, you're a winner. There are winners and losers. And I just loved meeting with your mother every year because after about 16 years, she was on the winning side of that equation, and she probably was for another 15 years. She was a huge winner. It gave me a great deal of satisfaction to think that one of my clients and one of my dear people that I regarded so highly of beat up an insurance company so bad. I loved it. Okay, that's Sadie, Dr. Sadie Lampard.
Just the corollary to that, you're absolutely right, although wasn't a subject that Mother ever talked about, except that we all knew how much she appreciated it and the advice that she got from you and what happened. But I think they entered into that annuity when interest rates were relatively high, so that the 12% that the annuity paid as the interest rate slipped became not only remarkable, unusual, but so did Mother and Mother's age and Mother's remarkable cognitive abilities that never faded.
No, that's for sure.
But it was, I think that had something to do with the change in the practice when Mother and Dad sold it to Tom and created the annuity. But that was a godsend, a blessing for both Mother and Dad. So I thank you personally for that, and it certainly made their retirement years much more enjoyable.
Okay, on to politics and my brief time in public service and public life. I was asked by my friend Rick Hewson, who at the time was an organizer for the Conservative Party, to consider seeking the nomination for the Conservative Party. At that time, Norm McGee was the MLA. Norm had indicated that it was doubtful that he would run again, and mostly due to health. And I was asked to consider it. So I did consider it. It's a long story, but I did seek the nomination of the Conservative Party. Premier Lougheed encouraged me to do it. Rick Hewson encouraged me to do it. Frank McMillan encouraged me to do it. Quite a number of people in Red Deer encouraged me to do it. I ran. I should not have won that campaign. I was running against a very good friend of mine. As it turns out, even then he was a friend of mine. But I ran against someone who was much more well-known than me, in John Oldring. He was at the time a city councillor. I was a nobody. But I think probably what got me to win that nomination was the huge that's not the right word, the huge acknowledgement of community service of my mother and father. A lot of people in Red Deer knew Tom and Mona McPherson for all that they had done. No one knew me. I think I got elected by old people in Red Deer on the strength of my mother and father. I shouldn't say not elected. I won the nomination for the Conservative Party. Having done that, then now I've got to go through an election. And but by this time, I was becoming relatively well known. I mean, I was the nominee for the Conservative Party of Alberta. Do you know who I ran against during that 1982 provincial election? Who my chief opponent was? Your friend and mine, Bob Mills.
Oh, really?
Bob Mills was the candidate for the Social Credit Party. I was the candidate for the Progressive Conservative Party. Bob was my biology 30 teacher at the comp. He was also my football coach and my friend. And he's, whatever he is, 10 years older than me or something. It was a really tough campaign, and I happened to win it. So I became the MLA for Red Deer. Now, interesting, this is a current production. People will say, well, that's rather pompous of him to say he became the MLA for Red Deer. Well, no, it's not that at all. When I became MLA for Red Deer, there was only one MLA for Red Deer. So I served as the MLA for Red Deer. After I left politics or government in 1986, it was then that they divided the constituency into two. And at that, Red Deer North and Red Deer South. Red Deer North was won by my predecessor, Stockwell Day, and Red Deer South was won by the gentleman that I won in the nomination 4 years prior, John Oldring. And so I love to say and have said it took two to replace one.
And they both became cabinet members.
Absolutely, and both became outstanding contributors. Absolutely. So, yeah, I spent 4 years as the MLA for Red Deer.
You certainly could have run again had it been your desire.
Yeah, I could have. I had a business. I wasn't smart enough to be able to do two challenging things at the same time, and I was working very hard in my responsibilities as the MLA. And I thought to myself,
I can attest to that. Well,
thank you. And I thought to myself, as we were getting close, and Premier Lougheed had retired, he was replaced by Don Getty. I served 3.5 years under Premier Lougheed and 6 months under Don Getty. I got a phone call from Mr. Giffen, and I went to see him, and he looked me in the eye and he said, you do know that the Premier will never make a commitment to anyone of getting a position in cabinet. That's not the way the system works. He will never do that with anybody. And then he put,
this would be Getty.
This would be Getty's executive chief of staff, Hal Giffen, and he put down his pencil and he said, but Premier Getty wants you to run. So I walked away from that meeting and I thought, if I run again, there's a way better than even chance that I will be called into cabinet. And if I get called into cabinet, I am not going to be able to fulfill the promise I made to myself, which was I do not intend to be a career politician. If I end up in cabinet, I'm probably going to be at this for another 10 or 12 years. And I never intended that for myself. So I left. And it was the right thing for me to do.
I think there were many people in the community that were disappointed because they were so proud of you. And it's true that the community, like you, had an expectation that you would be in the next cabinet. So there was an element of disappointment. But having said that, your two successors were such remarkable contributors to the political scene in Alberta. But are there any events that occurred in those 4 years that you would want to comment on, particularly ones that might have affected Red Deer?
Yeah, the 80s were an interesting time for Red Deer. Red Deer was growing. Red Deer was starting to develop and gain some real prominence in the provincial scene because of the outstanding people that came out of Red Deer and the contributions that people were making, like yourself and others, and many, many others. There were a few issues that really come to mind about what happened in the 1980s. One is railway relocation. Well, at that time, there were two provincial programs that were going on that were available to Alberta communities, cities. One was called a Major Continuous Corridor Program. The program was available for communities if they needed provincial funding to provide a major corridor transportation to help and assist traffic and major transportation through the community. The other one was a program called Railway Relocation, which was available, which Lethbridge qualified for. And the idea was that the province would fund the municipality to move the railroads out of the middle of the downtown. Well, I went to both respective ministers and asked if Red Deer could qualify for Major Continuous Corridor funding. And the Minister of Economic Development at the time said, "You already have that. It's called Highway 2, stupid. You don't need it. You don't qualify for Major Continuous Corridor. You have one. It's called Highway 2. All right. I went to the Minister of Transportation and asked if we would ever qualify for railway relocation. And he said, no. And that was Mark Moore. No. So then I got together with two people that I worked with so well back in those days. And
sounds like you were on the wrong track.
I was I was going nowhere. But I worked very closely with Bob McGee, our mayor, who was an unbelievable, and Mike Day, the city commissioner. And it was those two that came up with the idea of not asking for this program and that program. But we were uniquely positioned in Red Deer that we could combine both those programs in the same location, which was the downtown rail yards, and we could accomplish both on the same piece of land. And I took that to the two ministers. I got them to meet together, and that didn't happen very often. So we had a meeting with the three of us. And this was all from input from Bob and Mike Day. And we put together a whole diagram, we did the whole thing, and we showed that if we removed the rail yards out of the city of Red Deer, and we put in this road right through the city of Red Deer, which became Taylor Drive, and which allowed Red Deer to have a connection from the east of Red Deer and the west of Red Deer, because it all used to be disconnected by a rail yard, overpasses. That was a major accomplishment for the city of Red Deer. Major. And I had a big hand in that. The next one, sorry?
I say congratulations, but I guess a personal or secondary note, because one of the follow-up discussions became, what do you do with the old CPR bridge? And with a fair bit of assistance from particularly the council at the time, Larry Pym and Morris Llewellyn, who was the museum executive director, we managed to get the council to give us an opportunity to save the bridge, and were eventually able to and include it in the rail system in Red Deer. I suppose one of the things that didn't happen was when somebody came along and said, I'd like to get married on the bridge.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that may marry the north and south of Red Deer, but I don't know about two people. Anyway, the bridge is there, and it's been a significant part of the community in the Waskesiu Park system.
And so, that's how things happen. It couldn't have happened. It's not going to happen if the locomotives are still going across it. But yeah, it was a huge thing for Red Deer to have that relocation of the railway yards into a major street. Yeah.
It certainly, and as a long-term decision, it was terribly beneficial to the community and gave it a remarkable opportunity to redevelop its downtown, which is, of course, still occurring.
Exactly. Yeah.
Jim, that leads me into, you might have called it your enjoyment of sales and marketing, but how you have taken, I guess, your non-political career and focused your energy and abilities into many community activities in Red Deer, and perhaps you'd like to tell us about some of the activities you've become involved in and some of the projects that have occurred as a result of it. And it certainly has been a remarkable part of your life.
Yeah. Can you come back to that? Because I have another thought on one of the things that happened during my time in government. And
Sure.
I didn't want to, and there was kind of two of them, and they are the Red Deer Centrium and the Waskesiu Park. The Red Deer Centrium, I'll try to keep brief. The city was asking for funding to build a proper hockey and large facility at the newly relocated Westerner Exposition on the South Hill, out of town. Not anymore, but it was then. And I was going nowhere with that one either until I got a chance somehow to meet with the Honorable Lou Heineman, who was the provincial treasurer. And I badgered him. Oh man, I badgered him something awful. And he was getting sick and tired of me. And he finally had a meeting with me in his office. He threw up his hands and said, the only way, I approached him on the idea that government should provide the funding for the Centrium through the sale of lottery tickets, not out of Treasury. And what was it called back then? The Western Lottery Fund or whatever it was. He finally agreed. And he looked me in the face and he says, we will provide the funding. And my close cohort in that during all that whole time was Jack Donald. And Jack is a former president, his wife is a former president, but Jack was a former president of Westerner. And I went to Lou Hyman and I said, I have a guy that will build this. And he knew Jack. Everybody knew Jack. But I said, we've got the guy. We've got it all there. And he said, we'll provide the funding under one scenario, which you are going to put in writing. And that is, the Westerner, as long as you're involved, will never come to us for additional funding, operational or capital. I said, I have no trouble getting Mr. Donald to sign that. Anyway, it did happen that way. Now, so we got the funding. Jack, who was the real driver behind the Western, his board agreed that they would build that facility on their own. They would be the general contractors, and that was brilliant too.
Jack would be?
Not Jack personally, the board would be, but
Yeah.
Jack was
The driver.
the driver, and Jack had so much experience in building, and the Westerner became their own general manager, general contractor, and they built that, and it's there today. And you know what? You talk about shared recognition. I got that commitment from Lou Heineman, and I got the commitment from Don Getty before I left, because when I had my meeting with Don Getty, my departure meeting, I asked for an appointment. I got it with the Premier in his office, and I told him that I was not going to be seeking re-election. And his reaction was really neat. He went, "Oh no!" And then, so we talked about that, and then I brought up my piece of paper, and I said, "Mr. Premier, there's 3 things that it is my responsibility to bring to your attention on behalf of my constituents. One was railway relocation, major continuous corridor, which was already in the bag. The other one was the Centrium funding, which I already had a commitment from Lou Heineman, but not the Premier. And I walked out of that meeting with a commitment from the Premier that funding would be provided. But then I didn't run again. The Centrium was built after I was the MLA. It was John and Stockwell that had to keep that ball going, and they did a masterful job. But it was a year and a half before we ever made an announcement on it. And I kept saying to John, and I talked to them once a month, "John, Stockwell, stay with this. Remember, I've got a chit in my pocket from the Premier, and he will honor it. You just got to keep at it." So things are interesting how recognition happens. Let me give you an quick example. My name does not appear on a plaque at the Centrium. John Oldring's does. Stockwell Days does. And that's the way it should be. They were representative of this constituency when we opened the Centrium. But in the same way, my name is on a plaque at the Red Deer Courthouse. But I didn't do that. Jim Foster did. Jim Foster laid all the groundwork for that. Jim Foster did all that work. He does it today. On the new one, he's so responsible for what's happening on our new courthouse. My name's on a plaque where it shouldn't be. John, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But so those were a couple of things that I wanted to mention to you.
I look forward to interviewing Jim.
Yeah.
And there was another point you wanted to talk briefly about the Waskesiu Park?
Oh, the Waskesiu Park, yes, thank you. Well, the province decided, without any recommendations from me, that they were going to put a significant amount of funding into building urban parks in the province of Alberta. And that included Lethbridge, Red Deer, it included Edmonton, Calgary, a number of areas. We, fortunately, were getting, the number that comes to mind was $27 million, a lot of money back then.
I remember that.
A lot of money.
It blew everybody in town.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of work to be done because we were going to build a large park. And what items would become components of that park? The story I want to make behind that one is at that time, in let's say 1984 or 5, I was the MLA for Red Deer. And the city were the people that were going to develop and plan the park. And I was working very closely with Bob McGee, our mayor, and Mike Day, our city commissioner. They formed a policy committee. So there was a policy committee and a management committee. Now the policy committee had the mayor, the city commissioner, and the chairman of the city's Recreation Parks Committee, the MLA.
Would that be Don Moore?
Don Moore was he was
Recreation
the recreation director. He was an employee. The chairman of the board would have been a volunteer. That would have been Hugh McPherson.
All in the family.
So Hugh and I both sat on the policy committee. We put a lot of time in that, and Bob, and it was a terrific committee. And there again, parts of like sort of the recognition. There's a plaque at the Heritage Ranch in the at the restaurant there, the main office to the Heritage Ranch. It's kind of hidden. It's behind a coat rack and all that. Nobody sees it. But my name is on that. But I did have something to do with that. But so is Hugh's. And
nice.
That one means a lot to me. I took my sister up to that last week because she'd never seen it before. So that was the Waskesiu Park.
I hope you took a picture of the two of you and the plaque.
No, actually, I didn't.
You get to go back.
There was no, I didn't. I guess it'll be there forever.
Those opportunities.
Well, I got coat rack in front of it right now, so I didn't want to move the coat rack. Yeah. So thanks. And now your next question was?
Well, you've contributed so significantly to many, as a volunteer, to many events and organizations in Red Deer. I'd like you to talk about some of them, whether it's the hospice or Festival of Trees or some of the others that I may not be familiar with.
It's just it's just the ethos of our family. I mean, it's something that mother and father, like yours, must have been ingrained in us. We've all done it, as all of my siblings have done it. But you've got to give to your community. To occupy space in this world, you've got to give back. And if you don't give back, you're not owning, you're renting. And so it's just, we've all done that. Hugh's probably the most significant of us all, but we've all contributed. When I finished public life, my young son Hamish was very involved in freestyle skiing. He went on to come on the national Nordic team in freestyle. I became chairman of Alberta Freestyle. So there was a period there of 3 or 4 years where I was on Fortress Mountain pretty well every weekend. My son was skiing and I was working. I didn't get to ski much. I joined Rotary shortly after my departure from public life. I've always been honored to mention the fact that I was nominated to Rotary by a man who's I've admired and respected all my life, who was so influential in my political career, and that was Bill McCartney, who owned Travel Air in Red Deer, and Bill was a very dear friend of mine. He introduced me to Rotary. I've worked with Rotary all these years. I've loved it. I'm a past president. I believe in Rotary. I believe in the four-way test of Rotary. I particularly believe in the people in Rotary. So Rotary is a great organization. Rotary probably, sorry?
Do you want to linger on that at all? Because you were president, I think, the year before Bill Hall.
Yep, I think it was. I think it was the year before.
After the year after Ray Dunham, I'm not positive, but it's close.
Yeah, that's probably right. And you're a historian, you would know. I became president of the Rotary Club when Rotary International decided, rightfully, but they sent memos to all Rotary clubs that your club must decide whether you will admit women to Rotary or not. And that would have been kind of like maybe 1993 or 4, something like that. I think it was president in 1995. But I was the president, so it was maybe 1995. So I met with my executive, and we decided that I was strongly in favor of it. But there were others that weren't. But I was president, and I did have my cabinet, I guess, and we decided that we would take it to a vote of our club. Rotary International wasn't making it mandatory; it was strongly encouraged. You know what? That needed some work. That needed some effort. There were members that were really against it. There were a lot of members' wives that were against it.
Really?
But, yeah.
I mean, I remember that the major fundraiser was a men-only party, and that would last all night.
Yeah, with
for some.
kids, yeah.
But the first 2 female members came fairly quickly after that decision. I think Edna Allwright was the first, and Gloria Beck may have been the second.
I think you're right, and I'll never forget the day that we had the vote at a Rotary meeting, and we had discussions, many meetings up until that time. Okay, and you know what? I was so proud because we had a membership at that time in Red Deer of over 100 members.
Yeah.
I want to say 103, but it was over 100 members. And when it came time to actually vote to admit women to Rotary, it won overwhelmingly. It was agreed to bring women in. And the other thing was, we only had 3 Rotarians leave the club because of it. 3 that said, I'm not going to participate in the club when we're bringing women into the club. Well, I mean, that was an important accomplishment because we have had so many hugely important leaders in our Rotary Club that are women, that women have led this club. And we've had some wonderful presidents, but look at our club today. Our club today is, I mean, the people, the real movers and shakers in our club are women. they're doing the work. They're fantastic. So that's a bit of my Rotary history. The other thing is, I'll say quickly, is when you're president of Rotary or vice president, Rotary Red Deer sends you to the international meeting, Rotary International meeting. And in my time, it was in Melbourne, Australia. And so my wife, Marlis, couldn't go because we always went in, I think it's June. And my daughter, Lisa, was in the midst of, she was a very high-level dancer. So she wasn't going, so I took my son, Hamish. And Hamish and I went to Melbourne. And I went to meetings. And he slept. And then we took our lessons and we went on the most incredible scuba diving trip you've ever seen in your life. But so yeah, Rotary's been wonderful for me.
I'll linger on that for an interesting moment with the Red Deer connection. Next year, the International Convention is in Melbourne again. And when we, just after you were president, we had our club's 75th anniversary in 1998. I was reading the history of the club. And there was a brief note from that Harold Snell, the district governor from Red Deer, one of 3 I think we've had. He mentioned that the guest speaker at our charter night was a chap by the name of Jim Davidson, who had spoke on brotherhood. And then there was not even a sentence that said he went on to then charter clubs in Asia.
And I thought that was quite unusual for
A person from Calgary, a Rotarian from Calgary. Well, in fact, he did. It's certainly been a significant part of my life to learn about Davidson, finally find the family, and now go and visit the clubs that he chartered around the world, because he's the person who connected Rotary from Europe to Shanghai. And one of in fact, the first club that he chartered was with his partner, I think, was Leighton Ralston, who eventually became the Minister of Defense during World War II.
Wow.
But they went down on relatively short notice to establish Rotary in Australia and New Zealand after the Americans had failed several times. And the first club, for some very interesting reasons that the Australians know better than anyone else, that Rotary started in Melbourne and not Sydney, and that remains a point of contention to this day. But that's the first club he chartered, and he has, of course, a Red Deer connection. And then when we discovered that there was a mountain named after him that never had his name attached to it, 67 years later, we were able to take a number of Rotarians and friends to the top of it, and then phone around the world to the people who knew a bit about the Davidson story. Anyway, I don't mean to linger on it, but Red Deer has some interesting worldwide connections, which Melbourne happens to be one.
When you say, we probably should wrap this up, it's getting a little long, but you talk about sort of the jealousies between communities, Melbourne and Sydney and that kind of thing. I'll never forget, I learned this. I was asked by the Premier in my second year to move the speech from the throne, and it's quite an honor for an MLA from anywhere to be asked to move the speech from the throne. And so I moved the speech from the throne. And in the course of that speech, I was describing Red Deer, which is I'm the Red Deer's representative. And I said something to the effect, and I learned this, I didn't come up with this. I got this from our great old mayor, Bob McGee. But I did say in the House, Mr. Speaker, I'm the representative for Red Deer. Red Deer has been described as the Valley of Contentment nestled between the two hills of conceit. Well, I got quite a bit of that from the rural members, but I got a lot of notes from the Edmonton and Calgary members, and they weren't very pleased with me. But I did do that one, and so and I still use that from time to time.
Well, that had an impact. That's how I learned of that story.
Yeah.
I've used it quite a few times which I think to both of us means it's quite true.
Yeah, exactly.
Jim, would you like to talk a bit about maybe your Mitchell Center board, if you want to, the hospice that you've been so significant in helping fundraise and add to, and the Festival of Trees?
There's three that I know.
Well, yeah, those are three. What was the first one?
It was the Missioner Board.
Missioner Board. Well, that one was I really feel I have to be brief on this. I was asked by the Minister of Social Services at that time was Harold Cardinal. Not Harold Cardinal. Harold, just a minute. Did I make a note of that? I don't think so. Can't remember. I'll think of it. The minister appointed me, asked me if I would form a committee which would be representatives of the parents of residents of Mitchner Center and an organization in the province of Alberta who was deeply concerned with the institutionalization of individuals with developmental disabilities. It was a yeoman's job. It was a huge task. I brought these people together from all over Alberta, and we met for a year. Alan Anderton was on that committee. I appointed him to that committee. So we were an equal balance, but these were completely disparate groups with totally disparate views on the care of individuals with developmental disabilities. And it was one of my truly great accomplishments because we came together as a group and we made recommendations to the minister. And there were probably 11 or so previous committees that had made recommendations to the minister on this subject. And they all were shelved. And the minister accepted every one of our recommendations. I brought them together. And by the way, as an aside, it was around that time that I recommended a young doctor to the minister who was applying to be the director of medicine at Michener Center. His name was Dr. Bob Lampard, and you served so honorably in that capacity, Bob. But how many years did you?
26.
26, yeah.
I think, having been there and then having looked at its history, I have to say that was the highlight time in Michener's history, was having that board.
Yeah.
And some of the provincial standards that were set in terms of quality, in terms of operational decisions. It's not well known, and it certainly isn't an advertised or even told story, but that board made some very significant decisions that improved the care of people with mental disabilities in the province. Anyway, I hope that story does get written someday, because the relationship between the community of Red Deer and Michener Center is a long-standing one, and it's a very significant one. In my view, Red Deer is one of the most supportive communities in Canada. But certainly that was the highlight. Anyway, that said, did you want to say a few things about the hospice and Festival of Trees that you've been attached to for so many years?
Well, Festival of Trees quickly. Again, I owe so much to Jack and Joan Donald, who are huge philanthropists in Red Deer, community leaders, have been forever. I have, when they ask me to do something, I do it. I mean, they are really terrific people. And Joan and Kathy started this thing back at the Festival of Trees a long time ago. My wife Marlis became very involved in it as a volunteer. She served as chairperson 1 year, I believe. And I was asked to be the Master of Ceremonies. I think I've got a plaque upstairs that said I did it for 9 years or something like that. I enjoyed doing it. It was hard work because you're being a Master of Ceremonies over at a meeting with 700 people who are enjoying their evening, and they don't want to listen to someone talking all the time. And I didn't want to talk all the time, but there were things that had to be done. And so lots of times I'm speaking away and people are yelling and screaming and doing all that kind of stuff. And Joan would used to say to me, gee, how do we get these? I said, I don't care. Those who want to hear will hear, and those who don't want to hear won't hear. And it doesn't matter. I'm going to do my job. But I did that for years.
2 desserts.
Yeah. So anyway, I did that. That's the Festival of Trees. But they've made such a huge contribution to our Red Deer Hospital, Red Deer Regional Hospital. It's not even funny. I mean, that has just been an absolute. I hope we get to do it again one day.
Well, I think of Red Deer on a comparative basis, and that's certainly the most successful philanthropic event, not just of the year, but in terms of its many years that it's continued. I don't know how many dollars it's raised, but I know that the annual donation is up to $1 million an event. It's just, I find remarkable when I look at what it takes to raise $1 million, let alone every year.
Every year.
What a positive reflection it is on the community.
Yeah.
But no, certainly congratulations, particularly to you and how you became very well known and attached to that event. And reciprocally, I know that you enjoyed it, or you wouldn't have stayed with it for so many years.
Yeah. And then the hospice. Really, it that comes back to Jack and Joan Donald, particularly Joan. I mean, I was involved in the initial committee, the fundraising committee for the Red Deer Hospice. And I think the history is something like we got stalled as a committee. And we were just stalled. And Joan came in and took over the committee as our chair to complete the funding need for the Red Deer Hospice. And I sat on that board along with 13 other people. And because of Joan's leadership, we raised the funds. We raised the money to build the hospice back then.
And that's the original hospice.
The original hospice. So I always had a warm place in my heart. And then for the hospice. And then shortly after I was awarded as Citizen of the Year in Red Deer in 2011, which is really sponsored by the Rotary Club. But I think I said in my remarks that night there were only 3 Rotarians all the time this has ever happened that were actually Citizens of the Year. So you didn't have to be a Rotarian to get that award. But I'd received the Citizen of the Year award, and then the hospice put on a dance gala, and they had 8 or 9 individuals, men and women, I guess prominent people who would dance at their gala, and I was asked to be one of those dancers, and that's the hardest damn thing I've ever done in my life. And so I danced.
I thought you'd waltz right through.
No, I danced. Oh man, that was a hard thing to do. Honestly, I actually am a bit of I can dance. I mean, I can go dance. I thought dancing was just going to the dance floor and dance. No, you dance. Real dancing is learning and hard work. But I did it. But it caused me then and then through that I got to know better as another fellow Rotarian, Dick McDonnell and Toby Lampard and other people who were very, very involved in the Red Deer Hospice. So I went on board, and I went on the board. I served 6 years on the board of the Red Deer Hospice with your brother Toby and others, many wonderful people. And we went through an expansion. I think the greatest thing that my greatest contribution to that was I was kind of given the responsibility to do the fundraising and also to negotiate with Alberta Health Services. Our funding arrangement was brutal. It was awful. It was the worst in the province. We managed to convince Alberta Health Services to properly fund us on the operational side, because at that time, 70% of our funding we had to raise in the community, which meant that we were getting about 30%. And we could never have expanded the hospice under those circumstances. Never. We couldn't have done it. We wouldn't have been able to operate it. But in fairness to so many people in Red Deer and Alberta Health Services, they did commit to a changing in funding, which basically changed that formula rate around. And now I think we're probably at 65 to 70% of funding from Alberta Health Services. The rest needs to be raised in the community, which it should be. But that allowed us to go through a much needed expansion of the hospice. So and I'll tell you, one guy that was unbelievable in that process was an engineer by the name of Toby Lampard, because we would never have been able to get through that without his expertise on the building side, the construction side, the timing side, all that kind of stuff. My area is sales. I went out and raised money. We had a budget of $5 million. We raised over $4 million. We're fine under our funding arrangement it'll only be another year or two, and we'll have raised the balance so it'll be completely debt free. But hospice, Bob, you can't speak to anybody that has ever been involved in hospice as a father, son, daughter, mother, or father that hasn't been touched when one of their loved ones has been in hospice. It's just, beautiful work they do there.
You're bringing tears to my eyes because that's where Mother passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how Toby got involved in it. But the other thing that impresses me about the hospice is that there aren't many hospices in Alberta that are purpose-built, that were built as hospices. And it reflects so favorably on the community that it was ready, willing, and able to put, especially on their own accord, the resources together to build it. Yeah. And then now add to it. I know, speaking with Toby, he certainly realized the biggest problem it had, which was an ongoing operational one. But I think at one time there were really only about 3 of them in the province.
Yeah.
So it was difficult to get funding, let alone a change in the funding arrangement. But from the operational side, it's so important for the community. But from a medical perspective, it's so important to have that kind of an option available when you're dealing with somebody at that stage of their life.
Yeah.
Red Deer is just terribly fortunate in terms of timing, in terms of its own sensitivity to the issue and dealing with it. So I can't say enough about how important your contribution has been to the establishment of such a successful hospice. And it's the envy of many communities in Red Deer, in Alberta.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a lovely note to end on, Jim. It's been a pleasure chatting and learning more about what's perhaps gone on behind the walls of the community in terms of making things happen. And it takes teamwork. It takes good timing and interest and willingness. But as I said before, Red Deer is more of a leader than we realize, and I think that'll be true in the passage of time. Many things that have started here in Red Deer have been looked at, followed, and replicated elsewhere. And it's people like yourself that have been so instrumental in seeing some of those things happen. So, while Red Deer is young and so on, it's certainly grabbing its establishing its own life and lifestyle as we've had, I guess, the opportunity to live in it and enjoy it and appreciate it and make it different and better. So I quite appreciate the chance we've had to chat. I hope I haven't taken up too much of it, of the time with my own recollections, but it's people like you that have made Red Deer what it is. Thank you.
Pleasure. My pleasure, Bob.
No, the other way around. Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome.